Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining another live stream all about in world of VS Code. Um, Code Nerd, you're the first one here, and thanks for joining. Praten just joined also. Hello, Praten. This is exciting. I'm going to be learning some new stuff. I think you guys also with our guests. But before we do, I don't want to waste any time. Today is TikTok Thursday, so let's go ahead and jump right in and do that segment. Can Copilot help me write steps for installing MySQL in Markdown? Let's give it a shot. Let's make this numbered. And then we're going to tab through accepting everything Copilot gives us by default. Tells us to download it, the steps for that, then installing it, the detailed steps for that, following the instructions, the password. And number 3, we're at is starting MySQL, the detailed steps for that, entering your passwords, and then verifying MySQL by going to your terminal, doing the steps required for that. And look at that, even a visual representation of what you should see based on your schema. And for a final touch, we can add a logo just by dragging and dropping an image that I have right here. I'm doing Command K, V for a preview. Not too shabby. Nice. Did you guys recognize that voice on that Throwback TikTok Thursday? You know what? Usually on my TikToks, I include like some music in the background. That one I didn't really hear. Let me let you guys know if you also did not hear music on that. But that's pretty cool how Copilot could do that. Give you like an overall steps for a particular process, especially if you're new to it. That is cool. All right, we got a couple more people that just joined. Kilroy. Cool. I'm just wondering, Kilroy 79763, is that short for your real name, like an abbreviation, or is that actually, I don't know if it was like a joke off Killjoy, so I know that's like a term. What are we programming? Our guest is going to explain it to us. So good morning to you, and we're going to jump right in. So our guest today is Savannah Ostrowski. Let's go ahead and bring her up and do a quick intro. Hi, Savannah.
Hey, Reynald. How's it going?
It's going great. So please go ahead. Give us a little intro about what you do and what we're going to be demonstrating today.
Yeah, so I'm Savannah. I work on the Azure Developer Experience team at Microsoft. I've been working on this team for about 1.5 years now, and I'm the product manager for the Azure Developer CLI. And if you're unfamiliar with the Azure Developer CLI, or AZD as we call it, it's a kind of open source command line tool that makes it easy for application developers who don't necessarily know all the cloud things to get their app from local development environment in places like VS Code all the way up to the cloud, trying to keep it super application developer friendly.
Nice. So if we're completely new to Azure or anything about the cloud, this is going to be a good thing for us to be familiar with.
Yeah, we try and keep it, make it make sense for kind of your workflow, as opposed to focusing on the specific nitty gritty Azure bits that might be a bit overwhelming on day one.
Cool. All right. So that's going to be awesome for all those people that start off their development with, what is this cloud that you speak of?
Yeah.
So yeah, well, let's go ahead and jump right into the demo. And meanwhile, we'll hop back and forth with the chat and answer any questions. So everyone in the chat, feel free to ask any questions while we're doing the demo, and we'll keep this as fun and interactive as possible.
Love it. Okay, so we're keeping it super, I think, real today. This is the first time. This is a new feature that I'm going to be showing off, a new feature that we shipped in our latest release. Okay. But we're going to start talking about what application I'm going to be getting up onto Azure. We're going to talk a little bit about the Azure Developer CLI, and then we're going to walk through a couple AZD commands that can help you go from A to B. So I have this basic React web app that's scaffolded using Vite. It's really just a movie recommendation engine. I really struggle figuring out what movie I want to watch, so I figured I'd build something. I also wanted to play with OpenAI. So basically, this lets me select a genre. So I could select science fiction, make an API request. The request will go off and ask OpenAI to give me a movie suggestion based on that genre. And then I take that movie and query the OMDB API to get all the movie information about it. So I can make this poster.
Okay.
Don't judge my CSS skills. I'm a retired front-end developer and I did not have it in me to make this responsive. But basically, this is the app that we're going to be working with. It's, again, React with Python on the back end, fast API connected to a Postgres database.
Okay.
Okay. So I have my app in VS Code. But before I do that, I just want to give a kind of brief overview of what AZD is, because I think a lot of folks probably tuning in haven't heard of it before. AZD is an open source tool that allows you to go from local development environment to Azure. And it does this through high-level commands. So if we take a look at kind of the typical workflow, we have a couple different options for getting started now that we shipped this new feature. But basically, we have commands like azd-init and azd-up. And you notice there's like nothing about Azure or what things you're going to be using. It's purely focused on kind of the task that you're trying to accomplish. So things like azd-deploy and azd-provision. And then we leverage kind of these a more declarative code-centric model where we have infrastructure as code, which I'll cover in a little bit, that kind of lays out all the Azure resources we want to actually use for the application without having us go to the Azure portal or do a bunch of research. AZD kind of supports you in figuring out what the right Azure recipe is for your tech stack.
Okay.
So keeping it super high level. Okay. Today we have kind of two flows to get started. The one that I think a lot of, if you've used AZD before, you've tried out our kind of template-centric flow, where you know what your local app stack is, right? I mentioned React, Python, Postgres. I think most app devs kind of can figure out what they want to use for their app. But then when it comes time to figure out what you want for Azure, it might be a bit challenging. So the one option is to find an AZD template. And we have an open source template gallery that you can go off and, choose Python and JavaScript and Mongo, for, let's say, and then find a bunch of different recipes that you can initialize your application with. This is great. You get a kind of a blueprint, if you will, and a bit of an architecture diagram of what this is going to get you on Azure. But I'm going to show you a way that we don't have to deal with templates that we shipped in our latest release. So if we jump over to, wrong one, let's go over here. So I'm running my stuff. I'm running npm run dev, running a dev server for my front end. And then I have Docker Compose running on my back end to set up my database. I'm going to make that a bit smaller. And my API. And this is not ready for Azure. Like, there's nothing in here that indicates that I've done anything special to it. In fact, I built this not thinking about how I wanted to get it up onto Azure. I just focused on my local development, focused on getting the application running on localhost, and tried to just actually focus on the business logic of my application.
Okay, so quick question then, and for those who are new in the cloud deployment world, in general, could you give us like a snapshot of what is some of the tedious steps that you're normally used to having to do, and then that's going to be eliminated by using this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a kind of in the journey from your VS Code editor over to Azure. There's a bunch of decisions you need to make, right? Like, which cloud services do you want to use? How do I set up all the roles and permissions? How do I set up my local dev environment to be compatible with the cloud? How am I, figuring out security best practices, and then, actually going through the steps in maybe the Azure portal and clicking a bunch of buttons and hopefully having the right configurations and all that stuff to make it work. That's alongside figuring out how to package the application. And these are things that AZD, I think, really tries to accelerate. And I think something that you'll see as I kind of talk about this is that AZD isn't really doing anything magical. In fact, we try to be very non-magical because we want you to be able to understand what we've done, but we try and accelerate the time that it takes you to do those steps.
Okay.
So just kind of streamlining your workflow, but doing it in a hopefully pretty transparent way.
Nice. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So again, nothing special in here. I didn't think about Azure when I was building this, but I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that we can use AZD and VS Code. So I have the AZD binary installed on my machine. I'll open another window here. And I also have the Azure Developer CLI extension for VS Code installed. Here we go. This is included in the Azure Tools extension pack for VS Code. So if you have that installed, you already have AZD installed. But this is going to give us some kind of like gestures that we can use to get AZD functionality using VS Code UI.
Okay.
And I'll show a couple different ways of getting at that kind of throughout this demo. Okay.
By the way, Barack Gaver also made a movie overview site similar to yours. So great minds think
Cool.
alike. You know, so you got a
Awesome.
big fan right there.
Love it.
And we got some Fifth Element fans out there also.
I love it. Yeah, the thing is, I never know what it's going to suggest. So, you kind of roll the dice doing this live. Cool. Okay, so let's, I'm going to open this up. I'm just going to show you generically in the terminal where you can use AZD. So I have AZD installed right now. As you look at this, you'll see we've got a bunch of different commands, and we've tried to group them by kind of task. So you can configure and develop your app, manage your application resources and your deployments, do monitoring, testing, releasing, and then some, generic help stuff down here too. And we also try and include examples to help people get started. So trying to make this approachable for folks. But I'm going to run a command called azd-init. azd-init is going to initialize my application for Azure. So this isn't going to this doesn't touch or change anything about your application code, but really add stuff to the workspace to make it compatible with AZD so that we can use AZD gestures to deploy it later on. So okay. I'm going to run init, and I'm going to have two options. I mentioned before that we allow people to find a template and use that. We're not going to show that flow today. We're going to use our code in our current directory because I already have an application I want to work with. And I don't want to do the thinking of, I found the recipe I want to use, but then I still have to make some decisions about what infrastructure. I don't really care. I just want to get from A to B. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to click use code in the current directory, and then I'm going to see basically a summary of what AZD detected in my workspace. So I have a Python in an API directory. I've got React in my front end, and then I'm using a Postgres database for my back end. This is not using anything special. There's no AI in here. So in case you're wondering, this is purely based on looking at what files are in kind of those directories. Are we seeing .py files or .tsx files, requirements txt, that kind of stuff. So it is based on just basic heuristics. Okay. And then AZD tells us, okay, so we're going to generate files to host your app on container apps with an Azure database for PostgreSQL flexible server. That seems fine to me. I love container apps. It's probably one of my favorite Azure hosts because I just can write a Docker file and get up and running pretty quickly. It also is pretty cost effective to run. I run all my personal websites on container apps, and it costs me like a couple bucks a month. Obviously not high volume, high trafficked websites, but if you're just kind of, thinking about the cost and you're doing hobbyist projects, I think it's a really great option.
Cool. Oh, by the way, two important questions. Brian Scott mentions that he's a cloud engineer and connecting your domain and passing in the env variables for database connection strings. I guess that's what it's about. So the question is, does AZD let you pass along a domain that Azure can use? That's question one.
Yeah, so we're going to actually show some of this with environment variables in just a little bit once this is generated. We're going to actually pass along kind of those database connection strings. For domains, there's a little bit more work that's required for you to just tweak in some files that we generate. And I'm not going to demo that today, but I can link to a repo that shows that workflow and actually has that documented. But you definitely have the ability to do that with AZD. Okay, so equally as important is which VS Code theme is this?
That's important, by the way, because if you're upset at your theme, you're not happy. If you're not happy, then the code suffers.
It's true. So I am using a theme called Catpuccin for VS Code. What I love about this theme is there's actually an open source GitHub repo that has this theme for literally everything you'd ever want. So my Windows theme, my terminal theme, outside of VS Code, my VS Code theme, they all match. And that feels really nice to me.
Wait, your terminal theme?
Yeah, let me
There's different themes for each part of VS Code you're talking about?
No, like this is like they have like basically all these different extensions for like everything you could possibly ever want. And you could use this. They have like libraries for different languages. They've got terminal, like for every kind of terminal, but it all matches. So
wow. Okay.
I love it because I like the consistency. I also like dark themes, and I find that this one, they say it's soothing. I think it is soothing. So there's also an icon pack for this theme that's in the marketplace as well, if you want to install that.
Nice.
Cool.
All right.
Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so we have this summary. It looks good. I'm going to continue initializing my app, and then I'm going to be asked a couple questions. And so basically, AZD now is just filling in a bunch of placeholders for us in the generated code that's going to be output into our workspace. So it's asking me the name of my database. I know this because I'm using it in my app. It's also in my Docker Compose file. It's called movies. That's what the name of my database is. So I'm just going to enter movies. And it asks me what port the API is listening on. It's on port 8000. And I know that from local development. And then my front end is actually, I've written a Docker file for my front end. You don't have to, but I have, and it's going to be exposed on port 80. So those are the three kind of like application-centric questions that AZD is asking. And then we ask an AZD-specific question, which is, what is my new environment name? This is not your virtual environment. This is an environment name that is used by AZD to differentiate copies of your application on Azure. And so if I actually typed question mark, I would get a bit of an explanation about what this is supposed to be. And it gives me a couple of different options for names, and a kind of common use case, because you could have multiple environments, say for dev, test, and prod. It's suggesting Synest, which is the name of my app starter, -dev. I'm going to call this, let's make it shorter. It's not that much shorter, but Synest VS Code Live or something. And then stuff happened really fast. So I have now a couple new files that have been added to my workspace. Again, this is not destructive. It's not going to modify your application code, because I think that would be extremely jarring, and I would be concerned if we were doing that. So really, we've output 3 files, and we're going to talk a little bit about what these files are before running AZD up, and then make a couple tweaks to what was generated to make it work for my app. So I have a nextsteps.md, which kind of explains to me what AZD, let me make this smaller for the time being, what AZD did. So we have, let's go actually, so we have what was added. So that talks a little bit about the files that were added, how to make sense of them, which each of these things do. I also have details about how to set up my environment variables, actually deploy the app when I'm ready, set up my CI/CD pipeline, which I'm going to try and show all this, hopefully, time permitting. And then how we can actually not use Docker files to get onto container apps. There's another feature that we recently added that allows you to just like, basically we use cloud native build packs, which detect what's in your directory and then try and create a container image for you based on kind of well-known constructs about those languages. So if you don't want to write a Docker file, no Docker file, no problem. You can just still use AZD, which is awesome. And then some stuff about exposed ports, because that's super important. And then billing information and some troubleshooting steps if we run into any issues. So really trying to make sure that like you understand what we did, you feel like you can take ownership of the code that we generated, but not necessarily have to understand every single line on day one. Let's.
How long has AZD been around, by the way?
So we public previewed in July of 2022, and we GA'd at build this year in May.
Okay.
So
GA,
not that long.
General audience.
Pardon?
General audience, is that what GA?
General availability, so stable, basically.
All right. Okay. All these acronyms. I'm like trying. I
Yeah, I
don't
think
make any
that's probably
assumptions.
a Microsoft-ism, honestly. Okay, so we are going to look at what I would argue is the azd file, the thing that azd uses to know that this project is azd compatible. And so in here, we have some YAML. I'm not a huge YAML fan, but I think that our YAML schema that we use is not a lot of boilerplate and pretty easy to make sense of and pretty minimal. So basically in here, we've got the name of our project. We've got some metadata. This is basically just saying we used azd-init command on this feature version. I'm using a PR build because we're actually releasing later today. But you can change both of these and you can do whatever you want with these fields. It's totally cool. And then services. So this is kind of the important bit. This tells azd that we have two services. We've got an API and a front end, which correspond to our API and front end directories. And that was kind of what was also in that summary we saw earlier. And we're pointing azd at the directory where that code lives to say this is our API code, this is our front end code. Both are going to be hosted on Azure Container Apps. It detected Python for our backend and TypeScript for our front end. And then I have Docker files in both of these paths. So it found my Docker files and is referencing those. If you weren't using Docker files and you were trying out the cloud native build packs, you would not have this section here. So that's basically all this is saying. It's basically telling azd this code is the code that we care about. This is how it's going to be wired up. And this gives us our entry point to azd pretty much.
Nice. Okay.
So with that said, so this is our first kind of required file. Our second required file is where we start to talk a little bit about infrastructure as code. So infrastructure as code is really a programmatic way for us to define our resources on Azure. It also specifies how they're wired together, all of the configurations, all that good stuff. And really the main file, I think there's like two or three files that you really need to care about when it's generated. So the first is our main.bicep, and we're using bicep, which is the Azure infrastructure as code language. You could use Terraform if you wanted as well with azd. We support both if you're familiar with that. But if you don't know anything about infrastructure as code, really, you don't really need to. You don't need to understand all of this. I try and think about this at a higher level. So I'm thinking about this in terms of the top level resources we have. So in here, we have a resource group, which is defined. This is going to be our bucket for all of our resources on Azure. It's going to contain everything we need for this application to run. And that environment name that I specified earlier, that azd-vscode live, that's going to be part of our resource group name when we go and actually provision our resources on Azure.
Brian Scott just said that he likes it. It's similar to Docker Compose, but for Azure.
I guess it's like similar in that like it orchestrates some work on your behalf, right? There's some configuration required, but it's kind of just like going off and doing work for you. And so trying to make it, I think there's similar value prop there. I also see, I think someone said it's still in preview. It is stable GA at this point. What else is there? So we have monitoring infrastructure. So as part of this, we're actually going to be provisioning some basic dashboards and actually creating those for you so that you can monitor things like usage, reliability, responsiveness, all that good stuff, right from day one, which is pretty cool. Also going to create a registry to push our container images up to on Azure. Key vault, because we want to be storing our secrets, our tokens, our passwords in a secure place. We don't want to be inlining them. And then a container app environment with two container app kind of instances inside of it, one for our front end, one for our back end. And the environment around the container apps really provides a boundary, a secure boundary, so that we can actually have the containers talk to one another. So it has like networking stuff. We don't really need to think about that. Also our Postgres database. And that's pretty much the top level. These are our instances for our front end and our back end.
Okay.
And we've designed this in a way that there's like some stuff exposed here in the bicep, in the main.bicep, but it's really modular. So if you wanted to go and explore literally like every SKU and all the configurations for the services, you could like totally do that. I don't want to do that because also that's a lot of stuff to figure out. But we use like basically the like lower tier SKUs that are going to be cost effective for day 0. And then if you want to grow up your application later on, totally able to do that. Maybe now your app serves 1 million people. You can go in and make small tweaks with like huge impact later on, when or if you need to.
Vector X, by the way, I'm just realizing that for the biceps, you have like a visual of someone's bicep. I'm just, I don't know why I'm just saying that. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
Vector_X says, can you maybe ask why we should use a separate, quote, description language? When there is stuff like Terraform, what is the advantage?
Yeah, so we just use Bicep for the generation because we think that some application developers don't really know Terraform, so it's really a preference. Both will accomplish the same task. It's basically, it's kind of up to you. But for kind of our V1 offering, this is an experimental feature. As I mentioned, it like literally is coming out like today and being rolled out slowly over the next couple weeks. We're just using using Bicep.
Cool. Yeah, Decomputer World says that he just loves the features of VS Code, which increases the deployments and productivity. That's what VS Code's all about. So thank you for feeling like that. And then someone's asking about your theme again. What was the name of the theme?
Catpuccin. Yeah, cat. It's like, I think it's like cappuccino, but it's like cats. So I can probably like link that and we can add it in the show notes later or something.
Yeah, producer, if you could drop that link in the extension, if you find it on VS Code extension site, that'd be awesome.
Should have expected that one. That always comes up on stuff like this. Okay, cool. And then we have some outputs here that are going to be azd creates an .m file that's going to use for our deployment. And basically all of our outputs will end up in this generated file that will not be checked into source control because it'll contain secrets and stuff. But yeah, so basically you can go and dig deep on all of this, but I think about it kind of like a library, but you're like, or a package you're importing. You can understand like how to invoke stuff or how to like use a function from it. But if you're, using something like a really powerful data science library or machine learning library, you might not understand like all the underlying computation right away. And that's like totally cool. That's totally fine and expected. Okay, so before provisioning and deploying and actually getting this up and running on Azure, there are two things that I need to do for this particular app. The first one is that I have database stuff that I need to make sure that all my environment variables for my database, I need to make sure match up with what's expected in my container app for my backend. So I have my Docker Compose here. These are the variables that I'm using. I'm going to actually, let's split right on that. And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my api.bicep. I'm going to close this just for a second so we have a little bit more screen real estate. But basically what I need to do, and this is mentioned in that next steps MD, I need to make sure that these match up with these, because otherwise it's not gonna work, y'all. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to update these to be Postgres. And then this one should not be database name, but should be PostgresDB. And this should be Postgres password. And then this one I'll just update. I don't think it actually matters in my case, but just for consistency's sake. So that's step one. Just make sure that all matches up. The next thing is a bit more involved for my particular application because I'm using some external API keys. So what I need to do is flow my API keys down and add 2 more entries into my environment variables here to actually pass those into the container. Okay. So I'm actually going to pull this off screen just for a second because I don't want to have to reset my API keys after this. So I'm just going to literally copy my .m file from my API directory into the .m file in the .azure directory so that AZD knows about my API keys. Okay. So I'm going to do that real quick. Sneak peek. I have this already deployed. You can see my background, I guess, for now.
By the way, so like if someone's new to AZD and they're really trying to like get their chops strengthened, experimenting with it, what's the best resource when they get stuck that you would suggest for them to ask somebody?
Yeah, so actually we have some learn pathways that might be a really good option for you if you're like looking to kind of understand AZD and how things are wired up. We have like 3 modules on the Microsoft Learn website that can help kind of walk you through a lot of this.
Okay. And is there like any forum, like is it on Slack or
Oh yeah,
Twitter or?
we are wholly open source. GitHub is probably the best way to get in touch with us. We have like active discussion board there. Obviously, you can file issues. We also have community calls that are hosted once a month. So if you have questions, you want to see what's new and coming in AZD, we have myself and a couple of our engineers usually pop into just to kind of like to do some demos and answer questions. So that might be a good place to start.
Cool. Our producer is amazing. She was quick with throwing up that
Yeah.
link. I don't know if she's making those links on the fly or if she already had them.
I
But
think I sent some to her, but she's wonderful, so I don't doubt it. Okay, so what we're gonna do, so I gotta flow these API keys down. I have an OpenAI API key and an OMDB API key. So what I'm gonna do is there's this main.parameters JSON in our /info directory that was created. This is where we can consume a lot of our environment variables and pass parameters into our infrastructure as code. Copilot is usually really great about helping me here, and hopefully, boom. So I need to do that. And then I also need a comma here. And then I also need to do the same thing for my OMDB API key. So I just need to add those. And then now I'm just going to literally, I got to define some variables at the top of my main.bicep. So I'm going to go in here and type OpenAI API key and param OMDB API key. So I now have defined those in my main.bicep, that top level file. And now I'm just going to flow them down into the API container app. And I'm just going to define them anywhere in the block where that lives. Open AI and OMDB. And now they're squiggled because I need to just use them. I need to define them and use them actually in that API. So this is a bit manual. We're working on trying to make this a little bit more streamlined for folks because I think we can do better here. But want to be transparent, want to show you kind of what things look like today in this kind of experimental sort of workflow. Defining them at the top of my API bicep, and now we just use them in the block where we touched up all of our Postgres stuff. So in here, Copilot really rules, it helps me so much. Okay, so that's it. So again, this isn't necessarily required if you don't have a database or you don't have API keys. If you were just doing like a static web app, you wouldn't have to touch up anything. It would just work. I just need to, why are we getting a squiggle here? OMDB API key. Did I typo? I might have typoed. Huh? Now I'm confused. Did I typo somewhere? Make sure I didn't type.
Yeah, I'm trying to see.
Sometimes this happens. And make sure that I must have typoed in this file. Oh yeah, BD. BB. There you go. We're all good now. Crisis averted. Okay. So now we are ready to rock. We are going to run. Actually, I'm going to show you I use our VSCode extension to do this. So basically now what I can do is I can right click on my Azure YAML, and then I'm going to see in the context menu an Azure Developer CLI or AZD entry in here. This is basically just surfacing AZD commands from within the editor. And I'm going to pick package, provision, and deploy up. That's running AZD up. And this is perhaps our most magical command. And I say magical, it really just combines 3 gestures into one gesture. So we're running AZD package, AZD provision, and AZD deploy in sequence so that I can run like one command, walk away for 5 minutes, come back, and have everything just done for me. AZD is asking me for a subscription. I have already authenticated. So basically I ran AZD auth login, went to the browser, entered my Azure credentials, came back, and now I have all my subscriptions here. I'm going to click that one, and then it's going to ask me for a location. it doesn't much matter which one you use. I'm just going to do East US. And then now AZD is going to go off and do so much work on my behalf. It is creating, we just ran AZD package. So we created 2 Docker images, one for our front end, one for our back end. I could go and I could take that hash and go run it locally, use Docker for that. And then now AZD will go and run through that main.bicep file that we looked at earlier, and basically create all of those resources for us. And we'll have we have a link to view the deployment in more detail in the Azure portal. I like to stay in VS Code as much as possible, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually try and stay here in VS Code as much as I can during this demo. But what's cool, I think, is that we have like human readable names that are printed out for us. So we have like resource group, we've got key vault, we've got some monitoring infrastructure, our container registry, and then we've got the unique identifier, so that if we went to the Azure portal, we could actually look at what was being created for us and kind of make that connection.
Very cool.
So now AZD is going to go do this. I went ahead and actually finished this up ahead of the demo because it does take about 5 minutes. And 5 minutes is kind of a long time to sit and wait during a live stream. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a finished version of this.
It's like a cooking show. It's like, and then now we have the finished version of this cake.
Yeah. It's the demo magic, and I think 5-6 minutes is a long time to sit and wait in a demo. But I think that when all said and done, if you're thinking about the fact that we're actually setting up the right Azure infrastructure for you, not just zipping up your app and throwing it on a VM and then having you, later on have to deal with, how do I scale this? Is it secure? Am I getting updates and that kind of stuff? We're actually using the right infrastructure for this on day one, which I think sets future you up for success. So it does take a bit of time to create all the resources and actually wire everything up, but it's something.
But without it would have taken how long realistically?
Yeah, well, go through the Azure portal, click a bunch of stuff, and also make a lot of decisions, right? Like I think we zoomed through a lot of the decision making, and AZD kind of handled that for us, which I think for me, as someone who before a year and a half from now, I worked on the Python team at Microsoft, and I was not really a cloud or Azure person. I find this pretty approachable, but when I go to the Azure portal, there's like a lot of stuff happening there. So yeah. And then so basically after provision completed, we ran azd deploy, and then we basically see 2 endpoints, one for our back end, one for our front end. If I go to my front end, it will open up the app running on Azure, and I can go off and make requests. And I love this movie. This is a great movie. I watched it fairly recently. So this is fully wired up, which is pretty cool. And we got there in no time at all.
Nice.
So that was kind of like I think that's the big ticket item. The next thing I want to show is that we also set up monitoring infrastructure. So if I run Command or Control-Shift-P and open the command palette, I can type Azure Developer, and this is another way you can get an AZD functionality. Monitor, and then I have a couple of options. I'm just gonna go with the default and look at the dashboard. But basically what I love about this, again, you'll notice I like staying in my editor as much as possible. So what I love about this is that it brings me directly to where I need to be in the portal, so that I don't spend a bunch of time trying to click through and find the right thing. I have a full dashboard set up for us in this app to track users, reliability, responsiveness stuff for my app on day one.
Wait, so can you switch back to where you entered in your search term?
In VS Code?
Yeah, so you were in VS Code.
Yep.
And then you typed in Azure Developer, and you specifically chose which one? Monitor, deploy?
Yeah, sorry, I chose monitor, yeah.
Okay, and then that just brought you to that web page we landed on, right?
Yep, yeah, you just click OK, and it opens the browser and brings you to the right place in the portal.
Cool.
Which is pretty neat. Okay, last thing, and arguably my most favorite thing. And I say most favorite because it's not really just it's great that we were able to do our deployment from our local dev environment, right? That's great. But when we're actually building a real deal application, we want to be doing that from a deployment pipeline. We want to be doing that, every time I'm committing new code into my main branch or on release tag or something. And I want to show how we can use AZD in CI/CD to get all that set up, right? So I have actually gone in and copied a GitHub action from one of our templates, a pipeline definition. But based from this template, a lot of our templates already include these. So I just literally copied this, and all I changed was the branch I wanted to push to. But basically, if we go through here, AZD has a gesture that I'm going to show in a second called azd pipeline config. And what that does is it sets up all of the repo secrets and variables you need to have Azure and GitHub talk to one another without you doing anything. So what's really cool about this is that we basically just we install AZD from our official GitHub action, and then we have a block that allows you to sign in with federated credentials. That's OpenID Connect or OIDC if you're familiar with that, but that's a security best practice. So this block would get skipped. And then basically we're using those same AZD commands that we use in our local dev environment in our pipeline, but with -- no prompt, which means that instead of us having to enter things in manually, which obviously wouldn't work in our pipeline, we are going to be leveraging those repo secrets and variables that AZD is setting up for us so that we don't have to do anything, basically.
Nice.
Yeah. So that said, let's do that. We can do this again by right-clicking on our Azure YAML and running azd pipeline config. And by default, this is going to use GitHub Actions, which I love. You could also use Azure DevOps if you wanted to. There's a way to specify that with a flag when you actually run azd pipeline config. But when we run this, also, if you didn't have a repo set up for your project yet, AZD could go ahead and create one for you. I have one existing, so it's just going to push into there. But basically, it creates a service principal. So Azure and GitHub Actions can talk to one another, sets a bunch of repo variables for us, a bunch of stuff that was, we earlier told it our environment name, our subscription, location, and then these are things that AZD generates for us. And then I can go and say I want to commit and push. And then the thing, again, that I love is not leaving VS Code. I love to stay in my local dev context. And what I love is that there's a GitHub Actions extension, which means that I can monitor my CI/CD pipeline run from within my editor. So I don't even have to go to GitHub. AZD just set up my pipeline. I'm running it. And now every time I push into my demo branch, it's going to rerun, reprovision, redeploy my app. So we literally, deployed this for the very first time and set up a pipeline with basically no effort. I just ran a command.
Nice. So there's a whole conversation in the chat.
Okay.
People are helping each other out, troubleshooting some stuff regarding C++. We did a whole live stream on setting up C++. Producer, maybe you could drop that in the link and have some people refocus on us. It's called Getting Started with C++ and VS Code. It was done about a year ago. And then we could shift back to answering more other questions about your theme again. And you drop another theme because Afton just asked about your theme too. Yeah, we should just pin that somehow. This stream was sponsored by this theme.
The Catpuccin theme for VS Code. Shout out.
The Catpuccin theme.
Well,
all right.
Also, I guess I could also mention that if I go into themes and I click Catpuccin, there's actually different variants of Catpuccin. So if you don't like the one I have, which is their darkest variant, I think they also have a light one. If I type cat, they have if you're a light theme person, they have a similar, soothing theme for this. I'm not a light theme person, so I'm going to stick with Mocha. But you have options, folks.
Nice. It's kind of hilarious, honestly. You're mentioning all these sophisticated, intricate ways that we could just simplify our lives, and everyone's just yeah, that's great. But what colors are you using?
Well, what's important to developers is you got to make it feel good before you even get to writing code, in my opinion. So I get it.
It's true. All right, continue.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much kind of the end-to-end demo. We saw, initializing an application to get to be, compatible with Azure, packaging our application, actually creating those container images, provisioning infrastructure, deploying our code to that infrastructure, looking at monitoring dashboards, and setting up a CI/CD pipeline. So yeah, that's pretty much the end-to-end AZD workflow. We also support kind of the local dev environment. So if you start from a template, we've got VS Code settings for your tasks JSON, your launch JSON. I also often work in a dev container, and that's kind of beautiful. We have an official AZD dev container feature. So if you want to install AZD in your dev container, totally able to do that too. I AZD upped from a plane not that long ago. I was on plane Wi-Fi and I was testing something, and I was in the browser using AZD and deploying stuff to Azure, and I was like, this is wild that technology has brought us this far.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, this is awesome. Thanks so much for this demo. And I'm just looking at the clock now, and it's just about our time for our segment, our lightning round. Are you ready for that?
I don't know. Pop quiz this early in the morning? Okay, let's do it.
Let's do this. All right, producer. Okay, rules of this game. I'm just going to throw out 5 quick questions. Don't think, just throw out the first thing that comes out to your mind. All right. So, number 1, biggest pet peeve.
Biggest pet peeve.
Mm-hmm.
When people judge other people for what languages they use, or they say, "Oh, that language isn't." Everyone can use whatever language they want. I'm done with the tech wars about language choices. Different languages for different purposes, y'all.
I get it. I get it. It's almost like we're looking for reasons to argue. People got too much time on their hands. Yeah. Seriously, like this language versus that language. All right. Number 2, what's the scariest thing you've ever done for fun?
Oh, scariest thing. I don't really. I like roller coasters, but I don't like roller coasters with big drops. And there's this one. I'm Canadian, and there's this roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland that I think it's like almost a 90-degree drop. That was pretty. That was like I was at a theme park for fun, but it was absolutely terrifying.
Wow. All right. Is it GIF or GIF?
It's GIF.
Okay.
GIF is peanut butter.
That's what I always say. I think. So I said okay. I concur. I agree. Number 4, what's one VS Code extension that you cannot live without?
I feel like probably all of your guests have said Copilot lately. But honestly, Copilot for me with AZD, and okay, I'm gonna say 2, which is kind of breaking the rules. But I showed you both like the GitHub Actions extension and the Copilot extension. But I just really like to stay in my editor. So like that avoids me having to go to docs. It avoids me having to go monitor my GitHub action on GitHub. Staying in VS Code. That's my personal zen.
Nice. All right. And the last question for this lightning round. First guest, I really like this question. First guest if you had your own talk show.
Oh, I literally tweeted about this like 2 days ago. So I recently was finishing reading this book. It's called The Brief History of Black Holes. It's by an astronomer, astrophysicist named Dr. Becky Smethurst. She's a YouTuber. She wrote a book about her researches on black holes. And it was phenomenal and super interesting. And so I tweeted that if I had a dinner party, my fictional dinner party, she would be on the invite list. She would also probably be someone I would want on my talk show.
Wow, that's a good one. I used to want to be an astronomer, and then I realized how much math was involved. I'm just like, look, I just want to be like Captain Kirk out there,
Yeah, it's just so cool to think about how big things are. Like I think that I'm like the maths, like it's a lot of math, a lot of science, so much education to get to have a doctorate and astrophysics physics or whatever. So
yeah, nice. Well, awesome. Thanks so much for joining. So now when you have new fans from joining this live stream and they want to follow you, what's the best way for them to follow you and reach out to you?
Well, I'm on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it these days, at Savannah Ostrowski. You can also find me. I mean, I do the community live streams once a month on YouTube and on Twitch for the Azure Developers YouTube channel. So definitely come hang out there. That's like again an awesome place to learn about what's new in AZD and also just like ask questions. Yeah, I think those are probably like the best places. Also on GitHub, like I'm always answering questions on there. So come say hi.
Perfect. Great. This has been awesome. Producer, if you could throw up our links to our YouTube channel and TikToks. Everyone, you're already on YouTube, most likely watching this, but we also have a bunch of shorts on TikTok. So check us out there at vscode on TikTok and also for our YouTube, which on YouTube it's just at code. So join us again next week, and thanks for hopping in for this stream. Again, Savannah, this has been awesome, and thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. Super fun.
All right. Bye.
Bye.